My name is Chuck Gay, and my favorite thing is the music of Buck Owens and the Buckaroos.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and get recommendations without using an algorithm. Our summer of road trips continues because today I have another member of the Elvis in the Yukon team with me. Chuck Gay is a singer-songwriter, an actor, and a writer who has hosted a weekly radio show for Johnny Cash Radio, in addition to doing voiceover work for radio and television commercials, which is going to be so obvious as soon as he starts talking. Chuck, how are you doing tonight?
Hi, Leah. I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to get to know you. I've heard wonderful things.
Oh, me too. Me too. Thank you.
So you're based in Seattle?
Based in the Seattle area, yes.
Nice.
Born and raised, except for when I leave, but I always seem to come back like most of us do, right?
Yeah. That is where three of my brother, sister, and a cousin have all gone from Indiana to Seattle and Bellingham. So I understand the draw.
Well, I understand the draw of the Midwest, see, so I guess I'm back. I'm backwards.
Yeah.
But I've been told that a time or two.
So Chuck, let's start with the movie that got us introduced, and that is Elvis of the Yukon.
Yes, let's talk about it.
Yeah. And you play the titular role of Elvis.
I know, isn't that crazy?
It's cool. I've seen it. I've seen the movie, and it is beautiful, beautifully shot, a very fun little script, and you look fabulous in it.
Oh, thank you. Have you seen, I really appreciate that. And it is beautiful. Have you seen other cast members and other crew members? Namely, have you seen Amy Guth wearing the Elvis suit?
I did get to see that picture.
Oh, my
It's
goodness.
fabulous.
The whole experience was so wonderful. Everyone was so wonderful, but truly that suit was the star of the entire event.
Yeah. So have you been acting in short films? How did you come to find this film, or how did they come to find you?
Well, that is a great question. And so that is my film debut. I've done some commercial things, some industrials and so forth. But, the stars just so perfectly aligned I think for all of us, but, certainly I can speak, for myself. Pam Mandel writes this wonderful story based on this real life experience that she had on a road trip in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they decide to turn this into a short film, one of the great logistical opportunities that they had was, okay, we need a car wash / laundromat that we can shoot this film at, and it has to look like it's Alaska.
Right.
And so as the stars all align that this film's going to be shot in Belfair, Washington, when they cast it, again, just the luck of the drawing, the stars aligning, it was cast through the agency that represents me. And so
Nice.
I had the opportunity to audition for it with Amy and with Pam and with Rocco Cataldo, the director.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they couldn't find anybody else, so they hired me. I'm really thankful that they did.
Yeah. Now you hosted a weekly show about Johnny Cash.
I did.
How do you feel about Elvis?
I am a huge, okay, let's back up. I am an Elvis fan for sure.
Okay.
And have been my entire life. And Elvis is one of those guys where I feel like there's at least three Elvises. Right? There's the young, really, really young, leather-wearing, slick-back hair Elvis. And then you get the 70s Elvis and the jumpsuits, and you get these, he's still really fit and really, he's making movies, he's doing all these things.
Yep.
And then you get the end version of Elvis, which sadly, I think that's what a lot of people think of, when they think of
Right.
Elvis first. But first and foremost for me, he was an amazing singer and probably the greatest entertainer that ever lived.
Yeah.
And so how lucky am I that I get to play this guy who is based on a real guy, this Elvis impersonator in Alaska, who truly believes that he is Elvis.
He does?
He truly believes he is
Oh.
Elvis. And again, it's just based on a real guy because Pam Mandel, the wonderful writer, she is on a road trip and she stops to do her laundry at a laundromat with her friend. And this guy pulls in to get his car washed because
Mhm.
he's on his way to a gig. And he walks into this car wash laundromat in full Elvis regalia, wearing his jumpsuit and the whole
Yeah.
9 yards. So he's a real guy. What I think was so wonderful about the script and so wonderful about the story is that although this guy thinks that he truly is Elvis, in the moment that he and this woman have this interaction,
Mhm.
the switch is turned off. And
Yeah.
so even though, playing this character wearing a white jumpsuit, I'm just there getting my car washed. And these two people just have a very, very normal conversation.
Mhm.
And that was probably the coolest part of playing this character, who
Yeah.
happens to be Elvis, but there is absolutely no real, well, you've seen it. It's not an
Yep.
Elvis moment at all.
Right, you're not doing a voice, you're not shaking your hips, but you're in the full
Thank
jumpsuit.
thank God. Yeah. Thank God. And I didn't know until we got there on the first day of shooting exactly how this was going to go. And so I remember very vividly putting on this jumpsuit for the first time. And I got to tell you, if you have never put on an Elvis jumpsuit, you should jump at the opportunity if it ever presents itself. There is something inside of you that transforms when you put it on. You feel like, oh my God, I'm the coolest guy
Yeah,
on earth, right? But what I didn't know, so I went to Amy and I said, okay, so I got the suit on and I got the moccasins on, I got everything on. I said, and I kind of point at my hair and my face and my head. And I'm like, okay, so what are we doing about this?
yeah,
She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, am I putting on a wig? Am I doing, what do you, no, 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 no. It's just you. And I do laugh when people see the film and they see some of the stills and they're like, a redheaded Elvis or a
mhm,
blonde-haired Elvis or a gray-haired Elvis? And I think I'm so thankful that we did it that way because now I'm just a guy, right? Who
right,
happens to I'm a guy that thinks I'm Elvis, but I'm able to just have this everyday, normal, fantastic conversation with this other person as just a guy. And that was really fun.
yeah. I do remember, I knew it was based on a true story, and then I watched it and I was like, there's no way. There's no way it's based on a true story. And then I was like, wait, you do walk away from the movie wondering, does this guy think he's Elvis? And like even though you're not doing Elvis, and that might be what makes it's such a grounded performance that it doesn't, you're not Austin Butler, right, putting on airs to be Elvis.
Oh, another thank God moment.
But it is a delight. It's such a delightful little film.
I thank you. I think it is so great. And, I have seen it. And, the two takeaways for me, once I saw the finished version, number one, I made it through without throwing up, which was fantastic. And secondly, just watching Liz Pleasant, the actor who plays the lead character
Mhm.
based on Pam, she is so wonderful. I
Yeah.
mean, she is just great. And so I just marvel watching her performance. It's just so great. And Andrew Wind, who plays her travel mate.
Yeah. I was texting Amy halfway through. I'm like, I hate this guy. She's got to ditch him. He's the worst. I was just like, I was so sick of him. Like 2 minutes in.
A little angsty.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it speaks to what a great job that he did.
He really did. I'm talking to him, I think, in a couple weeks. So I look
Oh,
forward
are
to
you?
it. Yeah. Amy's
That's
making
right,
sure
'cause
that I
you're
talk to everyone I'm talking to almost everyone who worked on the film.
Oh, that's fantastic. So
Yeah.
you truly are doing the Elvis of the Yukon World Tour. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And I think we're kind of spread all over the place now.
Yeah, Amy and Rocco are back in LA. You and Pam are in the Seattle area. I think Andrew moved here to Chicago.
Right.
And
And
I'm
I
not
think
sure.
I think Liz is in LA, I think.
Yeah. Are there other auditions and movies on the horizon for you? Is that the goal?
Well, it's certainly always the goal. And, I'm very thankful that I do get a fair number of opportunities to audition for things. And so just continue to wait for that roulette wheel to stop, on my number. And we'll see what happens there. I am really excited about another project that I have. I've written a screenplay for a short film that I'm going to continue to pester and borderline stalk Amy to see if I can get her to jump on board and help me try to make that thing come to
Nice.
life. Yeah.
I love it. I've learned a lot over the last couple years, both through my friendship with Amy and another friend, Taya Lux, learning about the importance of shorts, submitting just a screenplay to festivals for awards, doing shorts, building your name and building your reputation through shorter films so that you build the buzz that leads to the feature in a way that I don't think I ever understood before, like the role and how much story can be told in less than 10 minutes. I have a new appreciation for that also.
Boy, and I'll tell you what, if you want to learn stuff and if you want to get smart in a hurry, hang around Amy Guth.
Yeah.
Right? Because she knows, well, not only does she know where all the bodies are buried and she knows how to get things done, but I learned so much I was listening to her on another podcast, and she was talking in great detail about her strategy in going to film festivals as not only a filmmaker and a producer, but also a viewer, and the amount of research that she does ahead of time in knowing how to find those people who she's going to have something in common, whether it's hey, we make the same kind of films, or we can talk about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. And I found it very fascinating. And boy, I learned a ton every time she talks.
Yeah. And then do you have any music projects coming up or are you performing or these days or you're more focused on writing and acting?
Boy, that is a great question. And how that world has changed in the last 4 years. And so up until the spring of 2020, I was working locally as a musician 5-6 nights a week. And, you wake up what was it, March 17th or March 20th or whatever that Monday was, when every single gig that I had just stopped and went away. And over the course of the next couple of years, some of the venues went away and, most of the gigs never really came back. But, it was also a gift because it gave me an opportunity to focus on acting and focus on writing as well. I have a regular Friday night gig right here in the town that I live in, which is Puyallup, Washington. I've been there for, boy, I think almost 10 years.
Nice.
And so it's great to be able to have that every single Friday night.
Well, Chuck, Elvis of the Yukon is why we're talking today, but I also talk to people on this podcast about their favorite thing or some of their favorite things.
And I have a lot of favorite things.
You have a lot of favorite things.
Oh my God. I don't trust people that don't have favorite things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. Sometimes guests, they're worried about upsetting the thing they don't pick,
Ah,
which is sometimes an inanimate object. So sometimes I will say to people something you love in case a favorite is too stressful. But I also don't know how people don't have piles of favorite things. Life is more fun and just more rich when you let yourself love stuff.
so they worry about offending the one they didn't choose. So, oh my God, I love broccoli, but now I'm going to be consumed by the fact that I think I've just hurt cauliflower's feelings.
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. Well, people are,
Yeah.
you
It
know.
may be a little bit stronger with I've had a couple women on to talk New Kids on the Block,
Oh,
and they're literally picking like a guy from the band, but actually they don't have a problem. And their second place person is a real living person, and they never have a problem picking a favorite one. But yeah, sometimes people are like, well, if I pick running, what's biking going to think? So, but
well,
where should we start?
I am free of all such guilt. Where should we start?
Yeah.
I love Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. I love the music of Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, and I am just so passionate about it. And I'm thrilled to talk about it because I love the journey of how I found my love for this music.
Great. Let's time travel.
Well, we are going to time travel, and we're going to talk a lot about my parents because when I think back on the gifts that I was given by them in terms of the art that I feel so much passion for, which are music and movies, it's interesting that my lifetime love and relationship with music was given birth by these two people who absolutely did not play an instrument, could not sing. You don't want either one of them to sing ever, but yet they gave me these wonderful gifts. And so in our home, there was always music being played, and my parents had very different tastes in music, which also turned out to be such a gift. I get this love of country music from my mother, and I get this love of pop music and things from my dad. So the music was in the house, the record player was in the house, the records were in the house. And the coolest thing ever is that from the age of about, oh gosh, let's say 4, we'll use 4 as a jumping off point. There was never a time where I was not given access to the records and the record player. So I could destroy that stuff, right? But I was never denied access to it. And so, I have this wonderful photo that one of my parents got up, must have been 6 o'clock in the morning, because I'm sitting there in my pajamas at the record player with all my records spread out. And it's one of my favorite things ever. So, I would get up and I would listen to my dad's Johnny Cash records, and I would listen to Sonny and Cher, and I would listen to the Bee Gees, and I would listen to all these things. And this was 1969. So 69 and 70, when the weekends would come around, Friday night, the Partridge Family was on ABC. And on Sunday night, the Johnny Cash show was on ABC. And so now I'm 5 years old. And quite frankly, I just want to be either Keith Partridge or I want to be Johnny Cash. And I don't really care which one, right? One of them's gorgeous and gets all the girls. The other one's this incredibly badass human being dressed in a lot of black. And who wouldn't want to be either one?
They're both great choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of gives birth to my love for music. And talk about watching television. So we watched the Partridge Family. We would watch the Johnny Cash show. Well, we would also watch Hee Haw. And for anyone of kind of my generation growing up at that time, Hee Haw was this hour, I think it was an hour show, of just pure ridiculousness, right? It was laugh-in for country folks.
Right.
And sketch comedy and ridiculously bad sketch comedy, but also wonderful music. And so I'm watching this show, and here's this goofy guy wearing overalls And so it's Buck Owens and it's Roy Clark.
Mm-hmm.
And here's Buck Owens with this red, white, and blue guitar telling really, really bad jokes. And I think this is absolutely one of the goofiest human beings I've ever seen in my life. And I think a lot of people of my generation felt the same way. Like, who is this goofy guy? And so I
Yeah.
was not a fan at all. I mean, I enjoyed the show, but I was not a Buck Owens guy at all. And fast forwarding, we always are so influenced, I think, musically and movies by people around us, but it's usually older siblings, older friends, I mean, I've always been influenced by older people, which is handy since I'm now an older person. I remember being at work one day. I was about 18 or 19 years old, and I worked with this really, really crusty old guy. He was so colorful. His name was Willard. And we're listening. We always had the country radio station on in this warehouse and we're talking about music stuff one day, and he looks at me and he says, "You know who was really good back in the day?" I said, "No." He goes, "That Buck Owens." He goes, "Not the guy on Hee Haw, but
Mm-hmm.
before Hee Haw." So I don't give it really a thought because I'm pretty sure he's full of shit, right?
Yeah.
And then one day I'm reading a magazine, back when people used to read magazines. And one of the things I've always found really cool about experiencing music is find those that you love and then find out where they came from,
Yeah.
right? So who were their influences, right? And you suddenly get to go on this journey because every artist is really, for the most part, the sum of their influences, right? And in a lot of ways. And I'm reading this article one day, and it's all about the greatest live albums ever recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone knows Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison is one of the
Sure.
greatest live albums ever recorded, right? But this particular article said, if you do not listen to Buck Owens and the Buckaroos live at Carnegie Hall in 1966, you are missing out on maybe the greatest live country album ever recorded.
Mm.
And I thought, well, okay. So I tracked down a copy of this record, and oh my God, it is the absolute. I think every artist has this sort of peak moment in their career, the zenith, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
everything they've ever worked toward all comes together in this one magical moment. And that's what happened at Carnegie Hall for Buck. And because I tend to come to every party late in life, I don't think I've ever experienced a whole lot of things, whether it be musically or
Mm-hmm.
movies or whatever it is. I never get to things in real time.
Okay.
And so I always find them after the fact. Well, I was a year old in 1966, so there was no
You'll
way I
get a
could have.
pass on the Buckaroos.
I get a pass on
Yeah.
the Buckaroos, right? And
Yeah.
so I listen to this record and I'm clearly moved by it. And so now I'm going down the rabbit hole. So what's the deal with this Buck Owens guy? And Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, unlike most country artists, they were truly a band. And every one of those guys was a star really in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
And making a live album today, there's not a whole lot of live to it, right? They'll go out and do it, but then they go in the studio and fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
And when they walked on stage at Carnegie Hall and lit that place on fire, took the tapes back to Bakersfield, California, and listened to them, they said, there is not one note that needs to be fixed on this thing. And that's how tight they were. That's how electric they were. And that moment started my lifelong love affair with Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. And I always have to say, and the Buckaroos, because they were such an important part of that magic.
Yeah. So I opened up their Wikipedia, and so Merle Haggard was in the group, was in the Buckaroos.
For about 15 minutes. He was
Okay.
there. He was there just long enough to suggest to Buck that he name his band the Buckaroos.
Okay.
Yeah, that was his contribution.
Oh, I see now. And very early on, Merle Haggard, sort of as a after. Okay.
Yeah.
So they played all the way through 2005. It seems like not a constant career, but that they came back and did some shows maybe not recently. Did you ever have a chance to see a combination of these performers known as the Buckaroos perform?
Well, so I did have the opportunity to see Buck a few times later in life. But when we go, I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about the
Yeah.
Buckaroos because we cannot talk about Buck Owens without talking about Don Rich.
Okay.
And one of my memories of watching Hee Haw and thinking, who is this goofy guy? I can still hear my father saying something to me that I would hear over and over and over throughout my lifetime. And that is some version of the offhand remark, well, that Buck Owens wouldn't be anything without Don Rich.
Mm-hmm.
And while I think that's complete nonsense, you also cannot overstate the importance of Don Rich. He was his right hand man. He was his right arm, to use Buck's phrase. He was his lead guitar player and an incredibly gifted and influential guitar player, wonderful fiddler. And unlike a lot of country records, not only of that time, but I think really throughout history, you've got your lead singer, your lead artist, and then you'll have someone harmonizing with you, but it's exactly that. It's a harmony vocal. It's a little farther down in the mix. It's not very prominent. It's there to sweeten, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even though this was Buck Owens as a solo artist with his band, when Don Rich, with this amazingly beautiful high tenor voice, when they would sing together and harmonize, it truly was a duet. And I think you would hear
Mm-hmm.
more of Don than you would hear of Buck. And hopefully we'll get a chance to throw some things on the website for people to go check out and a few clips of the two of them singing together. And it will just absolutely give you goosebumps when they sing together.
Mm.
Oh, and Don Rich was from just down the road from me in Tumwater, Washington. So that was really cool as well. So
And he opened for Elvis Presley at the
how
Tacoma
about that?
Lincoln Bowl when he was 16.
How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of Buck history right here in my hometown. When he was starting out in the late 50s, he was not a recording artist. He was not even a singer. He was a guitar player. He was a session guitar player at Capitol
Mm-hmm.
Records in Los Angeles and had a nice career doing that. And eventually gets a record deal to record a couple of singles, but his career is really not going anywhere. And Buck was of a generation of folks that migrated west from Texas and Oklahoma back in the
Mm-hmm.
Depression era. And those people who experienced such tremendous poverty, it really informed how they did a lot of things later in life. And Buck was a guy who was never going to be poor ever again.
Mm-hmm.
So even though he had an opportunity to make a couple of records in Los Angeles, he wants to make a living. So he moves to Puyallup, Washington, and buys a radio station or a share of a radio station.
Yeah.
So that's when he's up here and he meets Don Rich, who's a fiddle player, and eventually he has a couple of hit records, and he goes back to California, and then it all goes crazy. Now, fast forwarding just a little bit through the 60s, where he has this amazing run of success,
Mm-hmm.
13, 14 number one records in a row, in a
Wow.
row. And all of a sudden, the phone rings one day, and he gets offered an opportunity to go to Nashville and host this television show called Hee Haw. And up until this point, he is a serious hit maker and a serious musician with the coolest band in all of country music.
Yeah.
But when they tell Buck that in 1969, they'll pay him $400,000 a year to host Hee Haw,
That's so much money.
that is so much money. Yeah,
Holy
that is
shit.
so much money. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, of course, he does it.
Yeah.
Takes the Buckaroos with him, takes Don Rich with him. He gets to be the musical director of Hee Haw. And it was a cool gig for a little while, but his career never recovered from going on Hee Haw and wearing overalls and singing "Where Oh Where Are You Tonight" and making these really, really bad jokes.
Yeah.
So that's the trade-off, but he just could never say no every time they backed up the Brinks truck to
Right.
doing Hee Haw. But he continued to make records. They weren't the big hits. And even though I was only 9 years old, I remember this part pretty vividly. In 1974, they were in California making a record, and one night after the recording session, Don Rich was going to meet his wife and family out at the ocean for a weekend away, and
Mm-hmm.
and Buck says, whatever you do, and this is late at night, and he says, whatever you do, please do not ride your motorcycle to this
Mm,
weekend. And so Don Rich was killed tragically in a motorcycle accident that night. And really, what had started to happen, I think, with Hee Haw totally became accelerated when he lost Don. I mean, he felt like his musical right arm had been severed,
right.
and he never recovered from that. And he finally just stopped. He finally stopped Hee Haw, and he stopped making records, and he disappeared for the
Mm,
better part of 10 or 12 years, I want to say.
wow.
Yeah.
It's a devastating loss to lose your creative partner and one of your best friends, and it's hard
Mhm.
it's hard to imagine coming out of that.
Yeah, it was certainly devastating, but eventually he found his way back, and I think we owe a large debt of gratitude to Dwight Yoakam for that. He kind of pulled Buck out of retirement and got him to sing on a record with him called The Streets of Bakersfield, which actually
Mhm.
was originally a Buck Owens song, and I think Buck saw a little bit in Dwight what he had with Don Rich back in those days.
Yeah.
But you did ask me about a year ago if I had ever had the opportunity to see Buck. And I did. There's this music festival in Seattle, which I think it's still happening, but it used to be really big and it used to be really cool. Labor Day weekend, I believe, it was called Bumbershoot,
Yep.
and you'd pay your
Heard of
flat
it.
fee. Yeah, yeah. You pay your flat fee and you get to go in, and it's at the Seattle Center. And, there it is nonstop, these concerts and events and arts and all these wonderful things. And the first year that I went, I was in high school, 1981, and I saw Chuck Berry there, which was
Wow.
unbelievable. And some years later, I see this is probably the late 90s. I was looking at the roster, and boy, here comes Buck Owens. I'm like, are you kidding me? After all
Mm,
these years, I get to go see Buck. And so I did see him at Bumbershoot the first time. And when he decided to come back to performing, the one thing he wasn't really going to do was get a bus and go on the road and travel the country again. He was a little
mhm.
bit older in his years. He was an incredibly wealthy man because he continued to build this empire of radio stations over the years. So he was a millionaire just so many untold times over. So what he decided to do was he said, I am going to build the best nightclub that money can buy, and I'm going to build it in my hometown of Bakersfield, California. And long after I'm gone, this will be a venue that will be around for the people to have. So it's a restaurant, bar, beautiful performing venue called the Crystal Palace. And what he did, which I thought was so cool, this is back in the late 90s, I guess, he basically decided that he and what was left of the Buckaroos, we're going to be the house band. And this is going to be just like when I was coming up in the 50s. And we are going to play in my bar, my venue, every Friday night and every Saturday night for 4.5 hours. We're just going to be the house dance band.
Yeah.
Right. And so I had the opportunity. I think I saw him there twice. So the first time went in, and it's this magnificent palace, and you sit down and they serve you wonderful food, wonderful meal, and this beautiful stage. And he had a little museum there. You could see a lot of the cool stuff from his career. And so now he's up there for 4.5 hours, and his thing with the audience was, he said, if you've got a request, just write it on a piece of paper, bring it up to the bandstand, and we will play it. And so, he's constantly throughout the night, oh, okay, Tiger by the Tail, Together Again, Crying Time, Love's Gonna Live, all these classic Buck Owens hits, right?
Yeah.
One after the other. And then he says, He says, I love the requests. Keep them coming, but it doesn't have to be a Buck Owens song. We're just here to entertain you. So I don't care what it is that you want to hear, send your request. So he finishes the song and he reaches down and he pulls this piece of paper and he looks at it and he gets this funny, toothy grin on his face. And he says, okay, we'll do this one. And the band starts playing. I'm like, what in the wide world of sports is going on here when the band kicks off this song? And burned into my brain from now until eternity is when they get to the chorus of the song and Buck starts raising his arms in the air with these dance moves as he's singing, play that funky music, white boy. I'm like, my life is complete. I just saw maybe one of the greatest country singers of all time singing, play that funky music, white boy.
Fun.
Oh my God, it was such a blast.
I bet it was just what a cool experience to see him at home.
At home.
Like at a home he made for himself.
Yeah. It was like he'd invited you into his living room, you and about another, 300, 400, 500 of his closest friends. It was just, it was fantastic.
When you started performing and playing music, are there Buckaroo songs that are in your repertoire?
There are probably maybe a handful, and I don't do them very often. It's kind of funny. I do tons and tons and tons of cover songs because that's what, the guy sitting on the stool in the restaurant does for a living, right?
Right.
And so a lot of the songs that I choose, it's kind of a balance, right? So you can't just sit up there and sing these songs that nobody's ever heard. They're not going to let you do that for very long.
Right.
But I've always tried to go just a little bit off the beaten path. And I do lots and lots and lots of the 70s singer-songwriter stuff. And I love to do a lot of what people call one-hit wonders. And I enjoy the reaction because people are like, oh, I know that song. I love that song. Who does that song? So I get asked that question all night long, right? So, It Never Rains in Southern California. It's Albert Hammond. Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So I do lots of that stuff. But to get back to the Buck thing, sometimes I think there are songs and artists that I love so much that I just don't do them because I kind of feel like maybe I don't know. It's not a matter of not being worthy, but I'm like, oh, God, somebody out there's going to be like, you're no Buck Owens. I'm like, okay, appreciate that.
Yeah, I was looking at the Carnegie Hall concert tracks.
Yes.
And the song that I know on it is The Streets of Laredo. Just as I quickly skim. Because I grew up with, I watched a lot of Smothers Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
They were on Nickelodeon and Nick at Night. They were like just in high rotation in the 80s and 90s.
I love the Smothers Brothers.
They're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories about them is that in order to get things past the censor, they would write a dumb joke before their more political joke. And everyone on behind the cameras, the gaffers would know to laugh at the dumb joke. And then the censors would be like, shit, we didn't understand it. Cut that. They got to cut that one. And then the political joke would get through because they had been tricked by the crew.
Boy, they were strategic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were incredibly, not only entertaining, of course, and so incredibly talented, but a bit controversial, in those days. I think they eventually got fired by CBS, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And Tommy Smothers, he just passed away not that long ago.
Yeah. I want to ask you about something else that was on your list of favorites, but first I want to know if someone is coming to this brand new, hasn't listened to Buck Owens, don't know the Buckaroos, what 5 songs would you prescribe someone new to the Buck Owens and the Buckaroos?
Oh boy, that is a great question. I love the number five. I'm a big fan of the top five list, that's for sure. And I will say this, because I came to his music from that live album, it's a
Hmm.
perfect parallel to how I discovered Johnny Cash when I was a boy, because I discovered him through live at Folsom Prison and live at San Quentin. And so that was the Johnny Cash I knew. And same with Buck Owens. So then when I start listening to studio recordings, while I certainly appreciate them, they're a little bit jarring to me because it's not the same energy. So there's not a lot of artists I think that are, their live recordings are, I don't want to say better, but they're so good that
Hmm.
I enjoy them more than the studio. But that was certainly the case with Johnny Cash, and
Yeah.
certainly the case with Buck Owens. And I'm going to go right into your backyard with this one, because I don't know that there's a bigger John Prine fan in the world than I am. And so John Prine, I love his live stuff way more than I
Yeah.
do the studio recordings.
Yep.
Right. But anyway, so we're going to have a top five list of Buck Owens. And because it is for a new listener, we're going to kind of go right down the beaten path, except I'm going to take a big old left turn at the end. Certainly, you have to listen to Tiger by the Tail. It's his biggest record, single record of all time. And you have to listen to Love's Gonna Live Here again.
Hmm.
Together Again is probably one of the most iconic country ballads of all time,
Hmm.
as is Crying Time. So we've got four big ones right there. If there's one song that I come back to a lot, it's one of his very first records pre Buckaroos, and that's a song called Second Fiddle. And it is there's something about that song that I just love. And when he was making those first records at the Capitol Studios in Los Angeles, they just were some of the best sounding recordings of their time. I thought they sounded so much better than any of the records that were, well, not any, a lot of the records made in Nashville and other places. They were just beautiful. And his recording of Second Fiddle is one of my favorites by far.
Mm. Outstanding. So we
Mhm.
will link to those. We'll link to see if we can find them on YouTube or Spotify or something and link that top five
Absolutely,
list.
absolutely. We will. And in the 1960s, before he did Hee Haw, he had a syndicated television show called the Buck Owens Ranch
Huh.
Show, or the Ranch Hour. And what they would do when they'd be out on tour, they would stop into this television studio in, I believe, Oklahoma. I think it's Oklahoma. And so they'd stop in there for a few days, and they would record dozens of these half-hour shows, and they are preserved for all time. I do have them on DVD because I got them at the Buck Owens Crystal Palace when he was selling them. But there's
Nice.
tons of that stuff on YouTube, so those will be some versions that we can find. They got the cool suits, and they're young, and it's just fantastic.
Nice. Is there anything else about Buck Owens and the Buckaroos that if you walked away without saying, you would be disappointed?
I don't think so.
All
I
right.
love Buck Owens. I love the Buckaroos, and I really love Don Rich.
Nice. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to listen because I think even though I only recognize by title The Streets of Laredo, I grew up in a music was on all the time house, and I know that these songs are going to start playing and I'm going to be like, "Oh, yep, mom sang that one, mom sang that one, grandma like that." Like I'm pretty sure I'm going to know them once I hear them. So I'm excited for that.
I'm excited for you. And, I love having conversations about things that I love, whether it be music or movies or television shows. But what I find that is so incredibly cool about having these conversations and sharing the things that we're passionate about is that if you and I were to sit down right now and listen to Carnegie Hall together, I
Mhm.
would be listening to it with a completely different set of ears, because I'm listening to it as you're listening to it for the first time. So I'm really listening through you. I
Mhm.
love doing that with movies. I can, we may be talking about a movie in a minute or two, right? And I can sit down and find a person who has never seen one of my favorite movies. I'm not sure how that happens, but it does. Nobody takes greater umbrage than coming across a guy who's never seen The Godfather.
Right.
But when you sit down and watch this movie with someone who's never seen it before, I'm watching it through their eyes. And I enjoy so much taking it in that way because it's suddenly like I've never seen it before that way.
Yeah. Well, that's a better way to experience, you're not looking, you're like, wait, you didn't laugh at that joke? Why didn't you laugh? Why aren't you crying yet? So I think your way is better, a better way of introducing people. Yeah. I also have, this is, I don't know, maybe 170 episodes, 180 episodes into this podcast. And the biggest risk of this podcast is just the hobbies and music and books that I want to buy at the end of every conversation.
Oh my gosh, I know.
I talked to someone now a couple years ago about fountain pens, and my sister asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I was like, listen to the fountain pen episode, please.
So you ended up down the fountain pen rabbit hole, right? I have a similar experience, but it's not fountain pens. But tell me yours.
Well, I got one fountain pen and I really liked it, but I didn't end up fully going into it, which is somewhat of a relief. I would say the thing that I have fully leaned into over the course of this podcast, which started during the COVID lockdown, is embracing being a fan of comedy and comedy podcasts. I travel to live shows. I go see stand-up comedy. I travel to see performers I want to see. And just because we had those 2 years when live performance was taken away from us, and I realized that was something that I really missed, was experiencing comedy with people. And so over the course of the last couple years the hobby I've leaned most into is being an enthusiastic fan of comedy and going to see it live. And that has been it's been a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I have not been to a comedy show in so very long. And when I tell you what I think was the last comedy show that I went to, this will tell you just how long it's been, because it was back when Dennis Miller was funny.
And
he
that's a while ago.
Yeah, before he, I don't know when in the hell he became the right-hand man to, oh my God, what's that goofy guy's name? The guy who said he was a factor. Oh, Bill O'Reilly. Yeah, suddenly he became that guy. But, coming out of Saturday Night Live, and when he had that stand-up career where he was so incredibly smart and so incredibly funny, and so witty, and I always felt inferior because I probably would only get about 1 out of 4 references as he would continue to sub-reference himself until he about fell off the stage. But I loved that comedy, and he was absolutely one of my favorites.
Yeah. So that is what I've leaned into the most. But I interviewed Pam last week from your movie.
Yeah.
About e-bikes, about electric bicycles.
I reckon she's got some passion around that.
So we talked for a solid hour about them, and at the end I was like, okay, it's time for a test drive.
Yeah,
it was really
what
intrigued.
You need is someone to get you excited about a $3,000 bicycle, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And so you mentioned the fountain pen thing, which also can be a bit of an expensive path, right? So mine, which is similar but yet very different, is I have discovered this passion for pencils. And so as I look to my left and I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about 14 boxes stacked up of Blackwing pencils. And there's no question in my mind they're the finest pencils in the world. But the good news is, and I have this subscription, this quarterly thing where they send me a box of pencils, special edition. I get 12 pencils every 3 months, which I can't go through, which is why they're clearly all stacked up. But the good news is 12 pencils does not cost anywhere near one fountain pen.
Right. Now, in your pencil obsession,
Yes.
So you've landed on Blackwing. That is your number one brand.
Yes.
But do you sample other brands? Do you go and pick out, do you hear about pencils and you're like, well, I should get one just to make sure Blackwing stays in number one? Or are you locked and loaded?
I am locked and loaded as I can be with certain things in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Where I don't know that we should use the word myopic. That makes it sound kind of negative, right? But I love what I love.
Yeah.
I love Blackwing pencils and I love Buck Owens and the Buckaroos.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Can I also ask about your lunch menu?
Yes, you can. So there are not a lot of people in the world that know this because if I were to sit around and tell people that unless I'm not at home, which doesn't happen very often,
Mm-hmm.
I have the same exact meal for lunch every single day of my life. And there's no variation. And that sounds kind of weird and kind of obsessive, doesn't it?
A little, but it also sounds like one decision you don't have to make.
I do not. The only decision I ever have to make is what time is it going to
Mm-hmm.
happen? And I don't know if this happened for you, but during the pandemic, my eating schedule changed dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
And, suddenly I'm eating before the Blue Plate special, even the old folks think I'm eating too early, right? But one day, several years ago, and I honestly don't know how long that it's been, I was at home and I had a sesame seed bagel from the grocery store. And
Mm-hmm.
that's an important distinction because I'm going to make a sandwich with this thing, which means I don't really want a real bagel, like a really
Sure.
dense one.
Right.
Like if I became a movie star and had to move to New York City, I'd be probably screwed because I'd have to use real bagels, and that would just not work for this
You can
particular
get
thing.
fake
Can
bagels
I
in
get
New
shitty?
York
Can I
too.
get shitty bagels in New
You
York City?
can. They have
Oh,
Trader
okay.
Joe's. You'll be fine.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got the sesame seed bagel, and I buy a very specific brand of breakfast sausage. It's Cernio's chicken breakfast sausage. It comes in a
Mm-hmm.
1 pound chub, right? So these are not links. It's bulk sausage.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of the 1 pound chub is that it can be perfectly and evenly divided into 4 meals, right?
Okay.
So you've got 1/4 of a pound of chicken breakfast sausage, which is made into a patty, which is the exact size of the bagel. So
Yep.
that's going to vary every day because the bagels are never going to be the same size.
Okay.
So you got your chicken breakfast sausage, the bagel, which has to be toasted properly, which means you got to toast the inside on the bagel setting, right?
Yep.
Then you got to flip it around because then the top of the bagel is going to be cold. So you got to do that about half the time.
Okay.
Now you've got your toasted bagel. You take your jalapeno cream cheese, the Philadelphia jalapeno flavored cream
Yep.
cheese, spread that on the bottom half of the bagel. Then you very neatly put about 6 drops of Frank's Red Hot onto the cream cheese.
Okay.
Now they're strategically, yeah. Who is this guy? This is some obsessive stuff right here, right? So you got the Frank's Red Hot, and then you put the sausage on there, and Bob's your uncle.
And are you cooking the sausage in a skillet or in the microwave?
Oh, so the sausage is being cooked on I'll probably say this wrong because I'm not French. Le Creuset. Does that sound right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Cast iron skillet.
Great.
Very well seasoned because it cooks a sausage patty every single day.
Yeah.
But we didn't talk about the side item, the ancillary item, right?
Okay.
Which is I take a nice big handful of frozen crinkle cut French fries and cook them in the air fryer till they're super, super crispy.
Nice.
And dip those into Simply Heinz ketchup.
I mean, it sounds like a perfect lunch.
It is absolutely perfect. And because my schedule's so weird now where I eat lunch at 10 o'clock in the morning or 10:30, because how else am I going to have dinner at 3 in the afternoon? So, I eat 2 meals a day. So I have, one
Yeah.
around 10 and one around 3.
Yeah.
Every single day. So now I've been outed. Oh my gosh, the whole world knows that I'm a little obsessive about my lunch.
You're a little obsessive about a delicious lunch.
And it's fantastic.
Yeah. I think it sounds delicious. I used to live in Durango, Colorado,
Okay.
and the Durango bagel had a spicy breakfast bagel sandwich that was egg that they found like the Tupperware that was exactly the same size as the bagel. So they would nuke their, their scrambled egg mixture in these little Tupperwares to make a bunch of them the size of the bagels. It was that. I'm pretty sure I would get like an everything bagel toasted with egg, a spicy sausage, again, the size of the bagel, and then a pepper jack cheese. And then wrapped all up in foil so it'd steam a little bit more inside of there.
Mhm.
Delicious.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. I also don't get, people are weird about food sometimes, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And so you find out and you learn a lot about people by sharing a meal with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are some people who have, oh my God, nothing on their plate can touch each other, right? There's those
Mm-hmm.
people. There's people who eat one thing completely, then they move to the next one, then they move to
Yep.
the next one. So there's that weird obsession, right? And then there's people who, under no circumstances, are ever going to let you have something off of their plate, right? They're not going to
Right.
share anything with you. I took a French fry off someone's plate one time. They just threw them away. They said they wouldn't finish them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah. So based upon all of those freaks, I feel pretty normal about mine.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we don't get to just have favorite meals at restaurants. Like they have
No.
value meals at drive-thrus for a reason because we all want to order the one thing we want to order.
That's right.
Tonight I went to Wendy's and it was wild because I got the spicy chicken sandwich, which I always get there. And then I got it with 2 baked potatoes because you can just get baked potatoes at Wendy's. So when we finish, I'm going to have a big bowl of baked potatoes.
Oh, I haven't been to Wendy's in years, but do they still sell the chili?
Yeah,
They
do.
I remember getting the chili and the baked potato back in the day.
Yeah, no, you can still do it. And it's the only fast food baked potato in the game. And sometimes you need a baked potato faster than 45 minutes.
Hey, here's a weird plug. Speaking of Wendy's,
yeah,
many, many years ago, so 80s or 90s, I read a book called Dave's Way, written by Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's. And if anyone doesn't know Dave Thomas's story, it is a fantastic book. And I won't go into great detail about why it's a fantastic book, but I highly recommend it. His growing up, having been adopted, and how he got his start in the restaurant business working for Colonel Sanders. And it's really a cool thing. And he was a tremendous advocate in his adult life for adoption.
Yeah, that I knew, but I guess I thought it was that Wendy was adopted. I didn't realize he was adopted.
He was adopted, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic story. His story is it was really interesting.
Yeah. We will add that also to the show notes. Chuck, this has been what a fun way to spend a Monday night.
It has been, Leah. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on. And boy, we got to talk about Elvis of the Yukon a little bit. We got to talk a whole bunch about Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. We talked about my favorite lunch. We talked about all kinds of cool stuff.
Your favorite pencil?
Oh, my favorite pencils?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just thrilled. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great time.
Thank you. Do you want people to find you on the internet?
Absolutely. I'm on the Instagram at Charles P. Gay. I think there's a Facebook music page called Chuck Gay Music. So I guess depending upon what I'm doing, I'm either Chuck or I'm Charles. Where else do people find people on the internet? Instagram, Facebook?
Instagram, Facebook, your website, IMDb.
Oh, yeah. There's a website out there too. I think chuckgaymusic.com and I think charlespgay.com goes to the same place.
Outstanding.
But Instagram is cool. I've been trying to be a little more active there and putting up some photos of records that I'm listening to. And so that's always kind of fun. And,
nice.
And I never miss an opportunity to take a picture of my mother, who is 82 years old and just one of my most favorite people in the whole wide world. And so I like to put pictures of her and I. on there as well. So go check her out. She's a cute thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, people can rate and review Finding Favorites on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Smash that subscribe button, leave a review, tell your friends to listen. And you can find us on Instagram, Finding Faves Pod, FindingFavspod. If you have someone you'd like to hear on the podcast or you want to pitch yourself, send me an email, findingfavoritspodcast@gmail.com. And with that, wear your mask, wash your hands, and keep enjoying your favorite things.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.